So, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. Our listeners appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah. So I just want to start before we get into conversations on your life and problem solving, risk taking, all those kind of things. I want to do a connection activity. So the way this is going to work, I'm using a deck of cards from my good friend Chad Littlefield called We Connect cards, and
cool.
The whole intention is there are question prompts, and they're designed to help us connect a little bit more. So you have some choice though, because there are 3 different types of questions. There are self-reflection questions, so it's a little bit self-reflective. There are fun and light questions, and there are deep questions. You can choose. I'll answer the same, so we'll both answer it, but you can go self-reflection, fun and light, or deep.
Right. This is all of them, or can we start with one?
Oh yeah, we could go through if you want. Yeah, this could be the entire thing.
Right. Got you. Fun and light. We'll kick it off.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So this one's a light one. Here we go. What is one of your favorite topics of conversation? What do you like to talk about?
What someone else is really passionate about.
Love that. Really?
So much. Oh, I mean, I like. There's so if it's something they're super passionate about, that I have like marginal interest in. Like recently, anyone mentions they're remotely into like carpentry or like woodwork on any level or construction, then I'm like in, because I've like got sort of the fledgling phase of learning on that, and it's the one hobby I have where like I don't have almost the backing of like potential career. It's nothing to do with my work. It's just pure enjoyment, and that's all it is. So that's like one of them I'll dig in, especially when people are like they're into a trade and they tell me that my job's, you know, like I've got the dream job and whatever, and then they're always a bit confused when I'm like obsessed with how, you know, how their last plumbing job went, or how they put the roof on that gaff down the road or whatever. I love that. But then there's the other side of it, when someone's super passionate about something that I know absolutely nothing about. I find that really interesting. Like, because people aren't used to like going in on something they like. I don't know. And at the moment I stop understanding, I get even more interested. I'm like, well, it's like another. I just find it fascinating, people's passions, like that are often hidden away because they don't think a lot of people want to hear about them, right? Or they've gotten used to something like that. But yeah. What about you?
Do you think you're passionate? Do you think you like it because you're following something you're passionate in? You know, because you've essentially from being a kid, like being able to like follow your passion. Do you think that's why you get excited about other people's passions, because it's like resonates?
I suppose it does. Yeah, I suppose I'd like the stars aligned for us. We didn't really. Yeah. Like me and the people around me, we didn't really choose this. It just came off the back of like childish play and a sort of organic process that you know, I'm massively fortunate actually came through. You know, it's like we worked really hard, obviously, but some stars did align, and there's an element of luck in there, and so I suppose I resonate on that level. But also, I think when people feel comfortable talking about their thing and getting stuck in without worrying about like talking too much or anything like that, you get just a new angle to that person that you don't get so early. I think, especially when you first meet someone, like the moment they start talking about what they're passionate about, there's like this new air of confidence comes through, and you learn a lot more. Where you get a different insight on that person that's a little bit, I don't know. I think people like talking about themselves if they're given the space to do it and they feel confident doing it. There's obviously a threshold to that where people are just annoying, but
just like start looking at your watch, you going,
yeah. But if they're exuding that passion and then you can feel it in the way they speak, I don't know. I just love hearing people talk about what they're passionate about. Yeah, I just love it.
I think it's like I have to tell new adventure professionals, like, lean into the thing you get excited about, because I think everyone has their all authentic thing. You might be like the super nerdy guy on knot tying, and you might love tying knots, and it's like, I can get behind someone who's like super into knots, you know. But if they're teaching you something and they're not kind of into it, it really struggles. You struggle to get buy into it, right?
Oh, massively.
So you want the person to be passionate. I think, you know, often when I see people who really enjoy their work, you start to enjoy it, even if you don't like the topic, right? Because you just feed off the energy.
That's
Yeah,
it.
I
Yeah,
get that.
yeah. I've always thought if we do end up managing to open like an academy or a gym or something, I don't think I'd get parkour athletes to come in and coach a curriculum. I'd get them to come in and coach what they want to coach, you know, or what they enjoy. Like, what do you enjoy in parkour the most? That's your first workshop. You can build your own curriculum off that, like, because it just gives people, it's just a lot easier for people, isn't it? Like, I like this.
It is. It's funny.
Yeah.
So the last week I was at this, and I'd mentioned before we were recording, I was at this event, and it was all for experiential educators. I would say that you are an experiential educator, even if you don't think you are. And so I think that there's so many people who do this stuff, and the reality is experiential education is creating a really great experience that maximizes learning. What is a time you have learned something from failing at something?
Oof. I mean, every time, innit? Every time. Every time. These days, like, the failure becomes part of, like, I don't know. I think maybe it's because I'm older, but I've never had too much never had too much trouble with, like, the whole getting, like, angry at yourself for failure, like, which is massively prevalent in our world anyway. You know that, especially when it comes to, like, mental challenge. You know, physically you can do this jump in a parkour setting. That is, like, physically you can do this. You know you can do it easy. But there's some mental barrier that's sitting there, and it's just primal instinct of this fear, you know, like the height, the real danger involved. But then, you know, the perceived risk is often more than the reality, and the idea of not being able to overcome that can jar people out big time. You know, you get people punching walls with this. So I've never had too much trouble with it. Side, but I'll come away from it like a lot of the failure has helped me sort of hone in on my relationship with my ego. Is probably the main thing I've learned from, like, stepping away from jumps, like having never gone for them, or challenges or mental challenges that I couldn't go for. Stepping away from them is one thing. You respect the fact that you're able, on an intrinsic level, you respect the fact that you're able to not just send it and into the unknown and potentially hurt yourself. But you're also like, oh, but I could have done it. You know, oh, it would have been pretty cool if I did it. Do you know what I mean? And you have this funny battle, and that relationship is with my own ego has slowly evolved over the years. But yeah, late teenage years, like 17, 18, I went for a short phase where I was really hurting myself. Like I'd basically like come off we call them puberty legs, basically. So you're training hard for your early and mid teens, and then you come out the back end of that charging. You're strong. You're like, and suddenly you get better very quickly. As you get stronger, certainly your body's like, right, you're going to be doing this. Then let's turn you into a bit of a coiled up spring, ready to. Do you know what I mean? And then if you hold that consistency on a mental level, you start going for stuff that's really on the edge, but you don't actually know that it's because you're progressing so fast. You don't have much data to take forward with you. You don't have this slow rise. So I basically started going for stuff and getting away with it. And I was naturally quite powerful and fast. So there was a lot of stuff that I could look at and try that other people weren't trying. And so I become in my own little league in a certain specific type of movement. And then very, very quickly, the concrete started to answer back. And I had a period like probably, 17, 18, 19, maybe into when I turned 20, where really had to start roping it in and getting back in touch with the fact that, you know, you're still this isn't sustainable, you know, like rope it in just on an egocentric, like self-centered way. I was like, if I've done that one, then I can do this one. If I've done that one, I can do this one. Then you start to hurt yourself, and then things started very much changing. I was a lot more in touch with what other people were doing. Came out of my own little bubble a little bit, and was just like, okay, this is a beautiful community. There's so much more here than just like absolutely booking it at a really dangerous jump. And then once that understanding started to roll in, then parkour got a bit more, I suppose, enjoyable on a more consistent, like sustainable level for me. But yeah, I just ate shit in Lisbon, smashed my teeth out in Switzerland, like really hurt my back, all in the space of like a year. And this was after like basically like a spike of progression that my mind wasn't ready to deal with, I guess, and then broke it up.
Have you noticed in yourself, like in the last few years, that you felt more open to be able to talk about that stuff? Is that also related to that ego, do you think, as you get older? You start to think, like, how do we talk about like actually being scared?
Yeah, I think it's gotten, I think we, as a team, we've been quite good at feeding off each other's confidence with that type of vulnerability. So, you know, you hear one of the boys talking about something that, oh, we haven't actually touched on that before. We haven't actually properly had that conversation before. Or in edit, or the way that we would talk to camera, you know, years ago might have been, you're trying your best to let that vulnerability go, but you're trying to make it cool at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like that's I think the battle that a lot of young people have when it comes to sharing. They might watch a channel like ours or sort of any other, you know, someone's being really vulnerable about that, and they can't see themselves doing it, so they try and do it in their own way, in a way that doesn't feel as like lame or like, you know, like or whatever, and you end up. And the moment you try and script your thoughts in a way that you think other people want to hear it, it's really obvious. You can just see it through that. Yeah. So I think we started cutting down our chat less and trying in edit, basically, to the point where it was like, once everyone knows that they've said some vulnerable stuff without realizing on camera, there are a lot, and it went fine. And actually it was received really well, and it's not something to be scared of. Then it's like people are way more confident just letting it go. And it's sort of like, we realized early days that people want to, they have less of a connection with the challenge you're doing. They don't really care what you're doing, really. That's the cherry on top, like the jump and the swing or the gap, or that's the cherry on top of actually your relationship with that, or your understanding of that person going through that, like, and their perception of it. And it's like you could be doing the easiest jump. If someone's like shitting their pants and like talking through the process of being scared, even if someone 10 minutes ago did it really easily, that's the juice of that's what is interesting on a human level, you know. And I think once we all realised that's where the gold lies, it was easier to open up and actually work out how to process those feelings. Because I think, especially as men, you grow up are sort of under the assumption that you can't, you know, if you talk about that you know, that you're a wimp, that you're a bit like whatever, and that's like, which is funny because you never get really shunned for saying that stuff, but for some reason it is instilled on us on a cultural, social level. But I can't remember a time where someone was like, "Oh, like what are you talking about?" Like, I can't remember. But for some reason, through our early socialization, we have this gauge of untouchable man with no weakness, and it's such a funny thing to off the back end of it, like when you come out of it and you don't care about talking about all that. It's funny how it anyway.
It's that stiff upper lip, you know, of being English, you know. Like I remember over the last few years of hosting the podcast, I've just started talking a little bit more vulnerably about the challenge of doing this for a career. Like if I'm going to tell people that it's all awesome all the time, that's never a real good example, and it's not relatable as well. And I think that's what you're saying there. It's like if you were just, you're all rock stars and you never failed at anything and you're always getting it. If you only filmed the stuff you did great and you missed all the other stuff when you fell in the water or whatever, I don't think it would be relatable. You know, there's a reality that, like, I know Free Solo was a big film at the time, but I think the relatability of that is not there. Right? It's very hard to relate to Alex in his climbing because that's not what anyone else really could do. And his lack of a sense of fear is actually unrelatable. Whereas when you watch people like struggle and be scared and say like, oh man, my heart is pounding, or like I'm getting the feels and like I don't know if I can do it. And then when they do it, the crowds behind the camera are cheering because you know, because you feel it, you see it. There's a phrase, and this is the question really is like it's a little too easy for like adventure educators, the failure piece, because that's stuff we teach. But there's a phrase that I use: only way to get it right is to get it wrong. And I consider that in a lot of the stuff that I teach is I want to see people get stuff wrong Because I think when you get it wrong, you learn the ways not to do it so you can get it right. It's like you're chipping away at the marble statue, right? Chipping away at it until you find the statue underneath, but you have to be willing to get it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that this is going to go into a little bit of like a philosophical thing. There's this thing, and I was actually at this session last week on the psychology of risk. And the idea of, like, as adventure educators, how do we create risk for our participants in a way that feels legit and doesn't push them away from it? There's this phrase called the panic zone. If you take people too far and they get into panic mode, their body reacts like fight, flight, freeze, all that stuff. They're more likely to leave, and you lose them. So how do you keep them? There's this stuff in parenting called helicopter parenting. You've probably heard of it. And then, or it's like this idea of helicopter parenting is like the parent is looking down at the kid and always monitoring their behavior, so they prevent it from getting in trouble. Yeah. There's this thing called snowplow parenting, which is like here in the US, there's a lot of snow, but in the UK, it could be like lawnmower parenting, because essentially you're making you're making the road smooth, so the kids have no struggle, right? Like they walk through the smooth terrain. Yeah. And then this guy mentioned to me this idea of lighthouse parenting. This is the positive one, where you're like preventing the kids from hitting the rock. You're just there. You're monitoring. You're not steering the boat. Right? Yeah. Let the kid hit the rocks if they need. Where I'm going with this is this idea of, like, I think that risk is something that over the last decade or so has been like massively reduced because the fear of people getting hurt, right? There's a lot more sensation in the world about fear. I would say the work that you do really demonstrates like fear really nicely. What's your relationship to like that kind of, to taking risks? And like, how do you think that's like presented itself in your real life too?
Yeah, right. I mean, this is, if we went back to that question at the start, what I like talking to people most about, that's just like easy second best for sure. This is like, this is the juice. I love it. And it tell you so much about someone, about people going through it. And it's like, not necessarily in a bad way, but like, you know, it's like all around us. And I think when I first started getting interested in it was before, I think, we as a team had too much like self-awareness on our gauge of risk. Like we didn't realize that potentially our way of perceiving it or approaching it was a little bit different to the average. But a main point I started clocking it was when we had kids, as our following went up and people started recognizing us when we were training on the street. You get a lot of kids that come and want to try it, and they'll like jump on a little curb or something, or a little wall. And like, we've had a lot of trouble with the perception over the years of this sort of assumption of copycat culture, like kids are going to copy you, they're going to hurt themselves, whatever. The reality is your primal instinct just doesn't let you do this stuff. Like there's zero example of anyone that's you know, got on a roof copying what we've done and hurt themselves or killed themselves. Like there just isn't, there aren't numbers to back it, because the mind, like we don't have wheels, right? So you don't get like swept by gravity into a speed or a place that you didn't see coming. Like when you're under the control of your own body, you just, if you're standing on that edge and you thought from the floor, yeah, I could do that. And you get up there and you stand there. People just can't make themselves do it. It just doesn't happen. But these kids are basically, they'll jump on a little wall, and occasionally a parent will like hold their hand, or they'll be like, oh yeah, be careful, and I let them do it. But more often than not, the parents tell them to get down, like no, that, like they know what they're doing, like, so you can't do it, you don't know what you're doing, sort of thing. And that was when I started watching that, and this happened, you know, over multiple occasions over the years, and got to the point where I started thinking about it more, started talking about it more, and then actually started speaking to my parents about it and how what we were doing as kids and why we weren't really hurting ourselves and stuff. And we weren't like, I've really, you know, why do I have this sort of safety alarm bell, like even when I'm out training, like, you know, things that might break or things like, I have this sort of strangely, we're all quite hyper aware of the real danger around, and then the stuff that's actually made up in your head or whatever. And started chatting to my dad, and he told me some funny stories where it's like, you know, there's one in particular in my head that stands out, where there were some friends over and they didn't have some of his friends over. I was a little toddler or something, and we had an open fire and there was no fire guard on the fire. And his friends were like, why don't you have a fire guard? Like Toby's gonna do what about the kids? Like Toby's gonna hurt himself. And Dad was like, So he calls my parents call me Bob, and they're just like, like Bob, like go touch the fire. Like, why don't you go touch the fire? Like it's nice and warm. And I'm like walking over to the fire, like looking around, like it's really hot. Like I can't, like. And Dad's like, see, he knows the fire's hot. Like, and then it would be like frisbees up trees and stuff, and he'd send me up the tree, and little did I know he's underneath me, but I didn't know he was underneath me. Do you know what I mean? Little things like that, and then I started sort of piecing it together, and a lot of the boys have similar stories where it's like, you know, you go out and make that mistake. Like, you need to make that mistake when you're small, when you're learning how the world works. Make those little mistakes to build that data. And now with it is a cotton wool culture. Like it's more likely that your kid is going to grow up thinking that something's going to hurt him or her, and it's like, you know, a lot of it is real, but when it comes to but there's a lot more that is, unfortunately, I think now, is like we were saying, it's instilled on a level that people, you know, the idea of taking risks, there's almost a stigma behind it. But I think that it's a definitions thing, isn't it? It's like once you take, you know, someone falls into your world briefly and does something they didn't think they'd do, even if it's walking along a log over a bush or something, they get to the other side, they're like, "Wow, I'm good." That was a, you know, and it's like, and they'll talk about it all evening or this moment, and it's like, that's the beauty, that's where it lies, you know, in this tickling of that risk. You don't have to jump out of a plane, you don't have to like hit this other level, and I think, people, part of me feels sorry for people that haven't discovered it early enough, because you really have to work hard to open that door later on if you get, or once you're older, you know. Like,
it's so interesting because like kids when they're born, they're like this empty shell of perceptions, right? Like they don't know anything, and just the adults around them, I think, have so much influence over creating fear. So I'm going to show you a photo. This is my daughter's 8. I have a daughter; she's 8. This is a photo when she was 2 or 3 years old. So I took her out to our course. We have ropes. We have a ropes course, like high and low course.
Cool.
And I bought her a Petzl toddler harness. It's like this full body harness for like toddlers.
Oh, I see.
So I threw her up on a tree. This photo is her 40 feet in the air.
Mega. You just winched her up.
Yeah.
Wicked. Yeah.
She's attached to her back on a rope, and I just pulled her up, right? So, but the reason I show it is because I posted that on Facebook, and the response was not what I expected.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you expect like people to say how cool that is, but a lot of people responded saying like, "What the hell am I doing?" In a negative way. Yeah. Now that kid now, right? So that was when she was 2. That kid now, she's 8 years old. She is so physically strong. She's a part of here in I'm in Vermont, and there's a New England Center for Circus Arts. Essentially, it's like silks and aerials and flying trapeze stuff. It's super fun. And the instructors there are very experiential in nature. They teach the kids how to do all the rigging. Like you're in charge of your own safety. It's the same concept, right? Like if you watch them learning, you won't see the adults like holding their hands. They're like watching from a distance. They might give some coaching, but like these kids are like climbing 20 feet in the air without any harnesses, like on just using their hands. Her confidence has massively grown. And so I think like what impacted that experience, right? Like having her experience those things, knowing that, you know, I was controlling a lot of it. She wasn't aware of like the safety components, but creating this idea of risk, what your dad did with the fire is that same concept, right? Like let the kid figure this, what is scary or not scary. And they'll know if you touch the fire and it hurts, guess what? You probably aren't going to touch it again. So I think but there's a lot of preventative stuff and fear and saying like, don't climb to height, don't do this. I'm going to relate it to a little bit to climbing and stuff, because I know that you have a hand in climbing. I know that it's another thing that you seem to enjoy, because there's this concept that I'm struggling with at the moment is increase in tech. And it's so like the example would be, let's say an aperture belay device. Going for the camera, right? So let's say we're taking a Black Diamond ATC, right? And then you've got a Gree, all right, Petzl Gree. Right? There's an assisted braking tech. You might see it a lot in indoor gyms more, that there's a lot more Grees now than there are belay devices. And the concept behind it is it's safer, right? So this is my argument on this. There's this thing called risk homeostasis. It's a really cool study. I encourage you to check it out. And the concept is that everyone has like a static level of risk, right? Everyone has their tolerance, risk tolerance. And the problem with when you create things that feel more safe, so a Gree feels safer, what means is people take greater risks, and then more people get hurt. How do you, what's your relationship to like that world of like trying to make things safer And have you seen where maybe it's made things unsafer, or do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, my gauge I've noticed in climbing is strangely warped. I think because of parkour. Like I come into a world where you can make it as safe as you want, where from a world where like a lot of the time you have no option. Like it's entirely like it's all how do I explain? Like there's a roof gap that's physically quite easy, but it's absolute game over. The end of all if you mess this up, whatever. Yeah. And all the prep happens early. You can't actually do the thing. You can't do the thing safely. You can't do it safely. So your only option is the free solo equivalent, essentially. So it's almost the other way around. Whereas in climbing, like I'll be cacking my pants on something that like a normal sort of average sport climber is totally chilling on, but then, and that's solely based on like my like false. Very hard to explain. Like it's like, but then I'll be leading like a trad route, 10, 15 meters run out on a slab that I feel safe on, like. And the idea of that fall is way worse. Like the reality of that fall is way worse than it is on this sport route where I'm, 2 meters above the last bolt and all I'm going to do is fall on the thing. But because physically I'm finding it hard, my mind, the way I've learned is that if it's hard, physically hard, and I'm up high, that's now dangerous. Like think about stepping away. Whereas if it's physically easy and I'm in even more danger, if it's physically easy, my mind's able to rationalize because it's an entirely physical sensation. I know I'm not going to fall. I'm here. I know I'm not going to fall. And then, so it doesn't matter what safety you put underneath me. If I'm physically finding it hard, I'll be more scared than if I'm finding it easzy.
Yeah. So you've almost got to a point. I love having
with that, but those emoji things, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I think you have a real high trust in your physical ability. And so because you have a high trust in that, you're more reliant on that than you are on any gear that gets used. Because you know what you can do versus what the gear didn't do. And like I think newer people their reliance is far more on the gear is going to keep me safe than I can keep myself safe, right? It's like that. What's keeping you safe?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. The whole, like I've taken my brother, taken friends on easy multi-pitch stuff. And I'm the most experienced, right? But I'm going in knowing that compared to the people I've climbed with, I'm nothing. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? And that's when like, I have the question of the gree and the ATC and that, and I always get them on if I'm with them on the belay, if there's 3 of us, party of 3 or something, I'd much rather stay at the belay with whoever's belaying and have them on the ATC, and then knowing that going forward in future days, future trips, I can trust them on both and that they all stay focused, like rather than doing it the other way around. It's like it's the first time I've heard someone say it, I guess, but in my head I was like, just learn the dangerous ways so that you move into the easy one with the same headspace, because you're always in danger. And it's that those ropes give people a total false sense of safety. People like, I can't deal with the heights. Can't deal with the heights. But people that rush into it, they can deal with the heights way too fast. Almost, it's like, if all the time I can feel this harness around my waist, nothing can go wrong, and then shit goes wrong. So it's interesting. Yeah.
It is. It's because we're having this real big discussion around in the industry about like, how do we make it more accessible to anyone, right? So how could anyone show up? Yeah. The problem though we run into is when you create systems and safety stuff that allows anyone to do it, you've taken the idea of being able to physically do it. That trust piece is almost diminished. And then people lose focus. The idea of risk is not to eliminate risk. It's to manage risk. That's the way I often teach, right? So I always teach on this first because I want people to know how to do this. So they feel the tension, they feel the force in their hands, they feel it rub through, and they're like, "Oh, it hurts. I need gloves?" I'm like, no, you don't need gloves. You need to get better at being able to deal with that. Right? It's all about management rather than like, I'm going to make this as easy as possible that anyone could do, because then the focus is gone.
That's it.
And that's where people get more risky. I think people look at it the wrong way. I think they look at it as I'm going to make things safe and therefore I can do it, versus I'm going to get good at handling the risk.
Totally. I think it's just shortcuts, isn't it? I think most people find that place. It's after years, if everyone with enough experience will find that sweet spot where they start to understand that. But it's those shortcuts it's those early years where you haven't really experienced anything going wrong yet. And if you haven't experienced anything going wrong, like that for me is like an amber flag of a beginner. Do you know what I mean? Like, have you ever seen anyone hurt themselves? Have you experienced that yourself? Like, I'm not necessarily asking those questions, but when you find that out about people, a lot of people that have gone through some kind of physical trauma or seen it or been around it or understood the process of an extreme sport. And I don't really like saying that, but it's like, you can trust that they've got a gauge or some subconscious thing that's like, you know, we're not safe regardless of the scenario, which is a healthy place to, I think it promotes that focus. There was a really classic example in parkour a few years ago where some guys brought a big crash mat to a really famous spot in the centre in the middle of London, and it's this like iconic gap. You know, it's one wall high up. It's probably 2.5, 3 stories to the floor, the concrete below, and there's a big gap to another wall. And like, you vault this top wall and you land on the one down the bottom. It's probably like, I don't know, 16 foot across, maybe 10 foot down kind of thing. It's like, if you overcook it, you're in a bad situation, but it's not as bad as if you undercook it and you go down the middle of the drop, right? So these guys have put a massive crash mat at the bottom, and then the worst injury that's ever happened to that spot happened that day. That there was a crash mat underneath the gap. Classic, exact example of what we're talking about. You know, like, oh, there's a crash mat down there covering a small percentage of the floor. I can now try anything I want across this gap that's still by like serious danger. And he's basically come down, he's hit half on the mat, half off the mat after trying to move that he toe wasn't ready to do, but the crash mat opened the door for him, and the risk aversion just went out the window, and he just thought he was safe. But luckily, touch wood, he was okay. But good few months out and off his feet for a bit. But it's
it's definitely a very classic example, and I would say in the climbing world, it's the Grieger had more people fall on those than any ATCs. People pull the lever thinking it's actually releasing the cam, so they panic and they pull the lever, it opens that cam, and the person just drops. And that's happened way too many times. And that's that same thing. It's like, I don't have to be as trained, because I can shortcut the training, give someone a device that can protect that. But actually, it leads to more issues because you reference it like, and you probably get this where people see the stuff you do and assume that you're just naturally skilled, or you haven't experienced failure, or you haven't been doing this since you were 8 years old. You know, like they don't know the lengths of how long you've been doing it. Like, there isn't a shortcut. You're good at it now, and you have that awareness, and you know where the tolerance is because you've tried hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and that's a hard thing for people to see. They want a quick fix, and like, how do I become Toby Segar tomorrow?
That's
like,
it. Which hilariously sort of is happening. Like with the internet, these kids, you know, like same in climbing, these kids are getting to a point so fast, they're getting there so quickly to this level that took us, 10, 15 years, because they just see it. They just see that it's like, oh, if that's on Instagram, that must just be normal. Like, but that's in a positive light. Positive sense. That's what's happening in it to the sport. But
I wonder as well, like this, as we kind of talk about that, like, what have you seen over the last 2 decades of you doing this in terms of like your influence on the field? Like, because even in my adventure education, I would say we're still working towards becoming more known. I think that barrier of like, how do people see the positivity in it? Have you started to see that shift for yourself in terms of like more people doing it in a positive light rather than seeing the bad stuff and calling the cops on you or whatever?
Yeah. I mean, it was for us. It was a weird one because when we were first out all the time, it's just 15, 20 years ago. People didn't nowadays if someone's like, what are you doing? Like, they think you're nicking stuff or you're breaking in somewhere, whatever, like all that, like aim them. But once they hear the word parkour or free running, they're like, oh, right, okay, like, get down. Whereas back then, like, they didn't even know what those words meant. Do you know what I mean? So they think you're chatting shit and you're nicking stuff. And we were kids, now it's like the police get a call, oh, there's some people on our roof jumping around. They turn up expecting to find a bunch of 13-year-olds, and we're just like grown men with a camera and like our logos all over us. What? Like, what's going on here? Like, and then actually have a conversation or whatever. But it is, and we're in a bit of a bubble down in Brighton as well. You know, it's very open-minded community away from parkour, and they understand that, you know, there's a lot of art down here, a lot of expression, lots of people with different walks of life. So we've got it good, you know. But other places in the country, other places around the world, a whole different story. You know, it's like they don't see it, and it's a sort of a fear-mongering culture where like the only thing that isn't normal is criminal. That's we run into problems. But I suppose we've learned. It's a long time ago we had any real trouble with it, because we've learned how to speak to people and learn what the first thing you need to address is, you know, and like all of this. But it's a lot more positive than it used to be. And I think Instagram and YouTube and stuff's helped in one way, but only for the people that have invested a bit of time into actually watching a bit more. Like I think people that if you're like, oh, I do parkour, they're like, oh, I've seen that on Instagram. Like, is it this or is it that? A lot of the time they've seen, you know, Joe Scandrick jump off a roof down a lamppost, or they've seen someone flip between a roof gap, and it's like, unless you see just a little bit further past that peak threshold, you do think it's a bit mental. You think we're idiots, you know. And a few years ago, I would have argued that. I'd have been like, no, it's a lot of training. Like we've been doing it a long time. And now I just take it on the chin. I'm like, yeah, no, we're nuts. Yeah, we're mental. Yeah. So it's like, but people get it now. I think there's been so, like, especially outdoor documentaries and stuff that are slowly coming about all the sports, you know. I think people are understanding that there are like sort of normal people behind the stuff that's going on. You know, it's like I think I think that's what's shifted people's heads. I'm not really sure, but there still is a community divide. I think with your stuff it's especially different. You like your title there could be a whole world of different things. Do you know what I mean? And like so someone
exactly.
Someone is, here's what you do, and they're like, oh, it's that Alex Honnold free solo stuff, and then someone else hears like the free diving or like the whatever, and they'll just see those ends of the spectrum. But the beauty is always down the middle. Same in parkour, it's always that middle space.
Ultimately, those people who are going to find you and engage in conversation are those people you want to talk to anyway. Those people who are like saying, like, this is crazy. It's like, this isn't for you, and that's okay. I spend 90% of my time 40 feet up in trees, and like I tell it to people and they're like, oh wow, that sounds like nuts. And I'm like, yeah, but what I'm doing is creating better people, better communities, like the impact that I can have by stretching people into a risky area. I just see the potential in that, right? Like the growth that you've probably had and the rest of you have had in terms of like your own confidence, your ego. We took a little bit of the psychology. I think like the work that we do is so beneficial, and it's okay if people don't see it, but like as long as we see it, right? Like totally. You know, we understand the benefits, and that's okay. That's you know. And
the moment people hear that you're teaching, or they hear the word community or whatever, it totally breaks down their preconception immediately. Those words, like being like, oh wait, what? Like it's like, there's more to it. Like, wait, you can do this safely with kids? Like you can you can coach them into all this sort of stuff, and then the headspace shifts. But we have funny scenarios. You know, most police down here are quite good. Like they get it, they've seen it, they understand it. Like they got worse things to worry about, you know. And it's just like slap on the wrist. We've had a call, you got to move on, whatever. But some people come in like aggressive, like you're gonna break your necks, get down now. We're calling the blah 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 blah. We've got dogs in the car, all this, and it's like it's like respectfully, my friend, you would break your neck if you tried this. Like I get it, I get it. Like fair enough. You're not gonna. I get it. People aren't going to try it. But I'm like, you're projecting your gauge of how you would feel up there. You're projecting that anxiety, which is totally fair enough. It's how you feel like you need to do your job right now. But that's not the reality. We're going to need you, please, to just we will leave, but we need you to stop shouting, or he is going to hurt himself. So
that's all.
It's such a funny one.
So Toby, I'm gonna try to wrap this up in a bow if I can. But the main things we're really talking about is that idea of risk, that psychology of risk. How do we I think that there's a reality that, like, I think that a lot of the work you're doing is aligned very much with the work that I'm doing in terms of creating that experience, reflecting on it, thinking of it, experimenting, doing again. The phrase I'm talking about is experiential learning cycle, is like a theory on how we learn. And I think it's incredibly positive, and I applaud the continuation of what you're doing, because I use this often to reference your stuff with the participants I'm working with, in terms of being able to trial stuff, talk about vulnerability, and keep performing to get to some level of expertise. I think you have to be willing to do that. And when you don't do that, that's when you try to shortcut it, that leads to risk, greater risk.
That's it. I think fail often and fail small, and you're onto a winner, and enjoy that process. I think, like, I failed today, but that, like, the more you fail, the better it's going to be when it comes through. Do you know what I mean? And, like, I don't know, it's that type 2 fun thing as well. I've always found that interesting. Like, that is just that is where the beauty lies in any level of self-progression, I think. But that's I've started to realise quite subjective with that. Yeah. But just have a bad time in a level that's not going to kill you, and you will learn more about yourself than anything else, I think.
This has been a real pleasure, Toby. So yeah, thanks, Toby. Really appreciated it.
That was really good, man.